tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
We had frank conversations where about the 51st state comment, where we underlined that that was a non-starter.
Canada's premiers make their case against tariffs to senior White House officials in Washington, D.C. Plus,
when we all come together, we are greater in our impact.
Mounties in Penticton take a new team approach to crack down on violence after a shooting leaves neighbors scared. And
I've never seen any negative interactions between people and dogs, specifically off-leash or on-leash.
More leash or less? Metro Vancouver considers tighter dog rules for one of its largest parks.
The dog was off-leash, running around uncontrolled on the trail. The dog charged me, broke my leg.
This is CBC Vancouver News.
Hello, I'm Dan Burritt. Thanks for joining us. U.S.-Canada relations remain tense as the threat of steep tariffs on Canadian goods looms. But Canada's premiers did get some FaceTime with senior White House officials during their visit to Washington. Katie DeRosa has more on their campaign against the levies.
All 13 premiers were in Washington, D.C. today to meet with Republican and Democratic lawmakers and to make the case against sweeping tariffs on Canadian goods. It was unclear if the premiers would be invited to the White House, but by late morning, they secured a meeting. It was not with President Donald Trump, however. They did meet with Deputy Chief of Staff Jim Blair and Sergio Gore, Trump's hiring manager. Premier David Eby spoke to reporters shortly after the meeting, which he said was productive.
It was a frank conversation. Both Mr. Gore and Mr. Blair urged premiers to take the president at his word, that he should be taken seriously in his concerns on the border, on fentanyl, his interest in ensuring that the globe respects and treats the United States fairly in terms of trade.
Eby has previously expressed doubt that Trump's tariff threats were really about the border and fentanyl, and that his ultimate aim is to annex Canada. Eby reiterated during the meeting that Canada would not become the 51st state, a prospect that Trump has repeated over and over. However, after Eby's comments, Blair tweeted this: "To be clear, we never agreed that Canada would not be the 51st state. We only agreed to share Premier Eby's comments. Further, we said the best way to understand President Trump's position is to take what he says at face value." So that's an indication that tensions remain. Now, the federal government has promised to spend more money to protect Canada's border, and also appointed a former Mountie, Kevin Brousseau, as Canada's new fentanyl czar. But at this point, it's still a question mark as to whether those measures or the Premier's visit to Washington will have any impact in staving off the 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum and broader tariffs on Canadian goods, which are set to take effect next month. Katie DeRosa, CBC News, Victoria.
RCMP in Penticton say they're trying a new tactic to tackle crime at properties with repeat violent incidents. As Brady Strachan explains, it follows a shooting on Monday morning in a downtown neighborhood.
Police here in Penticton say this street was the site of 2 shootings in less than a month, the latest on Monday morning in broad daylight. And that has people living in the area feeling on edge, and the RCMP saying that they're applying a new approach to dealing with properties that have a history of violent incidents. Neighbors I spoke to are afraid to go on camera out of fear for their safety, but they say these holes on this house are the lingering reminder of the shootings over the past month. Residents described hearing multiple loud pops Monday morning just after 10. One woman who lives just doors away said she saw a man wearing a dark hoodie with what looked like a short rifle jump into a car with distinctive red rims and speed off. The RCMP are not sharing many details about the shootings or if they have identified any suspects, except to say they are actively investigating and taking the violent incidents very seriously.
Any public display of violence using firearms is deeply concerning to the RCMP, and we want to assure the public that we are absolutely, with the highest priority, addressing what took place yesterday and what took place 3 weeks ago, and it remains a focus for our frontline officers and specialized investigative teams.
Police say they believe the shootings are targeted and involve one problem residence. And because of that, they're employing a new approach here in Penticton. It's called the Property Standards Compliance Team, a partnership with other agencies, including the City of Penticton, where police, the bylaw department, and other authorities will coordinate enforcement efforts on specific properties.
When we all come together, all having different lawful authorities that we can apply, we are greater in our impact of what we can do to deter the behavior, remedy the behavior, have it addressed by the property owner or the person that rents out that property, because we've had a unified lawful approach.
Meanwhile, residents here say something must be done. They say violence has increased in this area in recent years, making them afraid to walk down what was once a quiet street close to downtown. Brady Strachan, CBC News, Penticton.
The former Kamloops Indian Residential School has now been designated a National Historic Site. In 2021, the Tk'emlúps-te-Secwépemc First Nation shared that preliminary findings from a ground-penetrating radar survey had found some 200 potential unmarked graves on the grounds. The residential school was open from 1890 to 1969. The federal government then ran it as a residence for a day school until it closed in 1978.
For us, it was about choosing to preserve the residential school, but also to commemorate and teach about the impacts of residential schools on children and the families, and for the reclamation of Secwépemc language and culture.
Many of the residential school buildings at the site are being used to teach Secwépemc language and culture. National historic sites are generally places that have shaped Canada for good or bad to help Canadians understand our past and present. Well, listen up, dog parents. Changes could be coming for one of Metro Vancouver's biggest and busiest green spaces. The district is reviewing its dog management plan for Pacific Spirit Park, where pets are mostly allowed to run free. John Hernandez went to the park to speak with dog walkers and more.
The leashes are off at Pacific Spirit Park. On this frigid Wednesday morning, it's mostly dog owners using these trails.
I walk my dog up here every single day for at least an hour.
I absolutely love it. I rely on it probably 4 to 5 days a week.
Most of these pathways are designated leash optional, but the canine freedom to roam untethered could soon be in jeopardy. Metro Vancouver is reviewing its dog management plan in response to what it calls complaints and user conflicts.
In 2023, I was running through Pacific Spirit, and a dog was off leash, running around uncontrolled on the trail. The dog charged me, broke my leg, and permanently damaged my knee.
One proposal is a pilot project to make leashes mandatory in the larger southern portion of the park and keep certain trails in the smaller northern part leash optional.
I hear about this concern a lot from residents. There will be pushback if we move to this, but I think what we're not hearing as much is the sort of silent majority that I'm hearing from.
Yeah, I think the whole proposal seems to be from a minority rather than the actual wider population, yeah.
Most pet owners here aren't on board.
I've never seen any negative interactions between people and dogs, specifically off-leash or on-leash.
There are leash-required trails here and off-leash, so I think that if people obey them, I don't think there's an issue.
Advocates have launched a petition against the proposal, calling for more consultation.
I'd be very disappointed because there's not many off-leash places we can take the dog.
I've written a letter. They told me nothing's been decided.
I think we want to step back and take a look at how people are using the site, do a comprehensive review of where the portals and access points are.
Pet owners hoping their voices will put this dog management plan on pause. John Hernandez, CBC News, Vancouver.
A new acute care tower is set to open at Lionsgate Hospital in North Vancouver, offering private patient care rooms and more operating space. As Michelle Gomez shows us, its design focuses on nature.
1, 2, 3! Woo!
With a serene blue and green color scheme, wooden wall panels, and plenty of natural light, the Paul Myers Tower is almost ready to welcome patients. Healthcare officials say having a peaceful environment is important to a patient's well-being.
We want light and people to be able to see the incredible surrounding that they're in here, because we know that makes them healthier. and they feel more comfortable.
The tower has over 100 private patient rooms, each with a large window, its own bathroom, and a pull-out sofa for family members. It also features 8 new operating rooms.
These are universal operating rooms, and what that means is you can do pretty much anything in this operating room. So it makes it very, very flexible.
And for when patients need some fresh air, there's a rooftop garden. The building was designed in collaboration with the Squamish and Tsleil-Waututh nations. It includes a sacred space dedicated to cultural practices, such as smudging, drumming, and singing.
So you can see salmon, eelgrass, phosphorescence. This is the two-headed serpent. There's kelp on those panels there. And for example, even the pattern on these chairs was chosen by advisors from the two host nations.
Paul Myers himself was at the Wednesday afternoon ribbon-cutting ceremony. Now in his 90s, Myers was a plumber and business owner. The North Shore resident donated $25 million to the new tower.
I was fortunate in life and with money-wise, and so a person only needs so much. You can only eat 3 meals a day.
Exactly.
The tower cost $325 million in total, about half of which came from the province. It will open on March 9th and will serve the North Shore and neighbouring communities, including the Sea to Sky Corridor, Sunshine Coast and the Central Coast. Michelle Gomez, CBC News, North Vancouver.
India's Prime Minister is in the U.S. capital, aiming to stave off potential tariffs on his country, along with a second issue, deportation flights sending Indian nationals back to their homeland. The CBC's Salima Shivji met with some of the affected families in India.
The protests have been loud across India, the fury deep over Indians living illegally in the U.S. deported, handcuffed and shackled. But it's pain and worry that dominates at this home in Punjab. Swarn Singh says they're adjusting to having their only child forced back to India. Akashdeep sent this video to his father from the U.S.-Mexico border.
This is right when he crossed.
The 23-year-old took the infamous illegal donkey route, as it's called, into the United States, and then no word for 12 days, until the family realized their son was deported on an American military plane. We spent so much money, and still my son wasn't able to settle abroad. Our livelihood is gone just like that.
2 acres.
Singh shows me what they sold to get their son to the States. Not just land, but buffaloes, jewelry, a tractor. Heavily in debt, even making chai is a chore for Akashdeep's mother. I'm on antidepressants. I can't see how we'll ever repay our loans, Daljit Kaur tells me. With India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Washington to visit his good friend Donald Trump, Singh thinks there's hope for others. Prime Minister Modi needs to tell Trump, stop sending our children back, he says, stop crushing their dreams. It's unlikely on such a tricky issue. India is keen to show the Trump administration they're open to taking back illegal migrants. The goal for New Delhi is to avoid punishing tariffs or a trade war. There's fear here mixed with resignation that the deportations will ramp up, even if Modi and Trump discuss the issue at length. Many here know someone who's taken the illegal route to the United States. At this college, deportation is what many are talking about.
People are so much worried about this as they are afraid of going there.
I think many Indians who are in America illegally will be deported, this student says. The illegal route is a bad idea, he warns. Even as a second military plane full of deportees is expected to land in India as early as this weekend. Salima Shivji, CBC News, Amritsar.
Our science and climate specialist Darius Madavi here with the look at the weather, and it's constant.
Constant, yes, that's a good
Constantly
word.
Cold.
Yes. Some change on the horizon, but here on the south coast, we still got a couple days of mostly sunshine with some cloud mixed in and a slight chance of a flurry tomorrow night. We've got some extreme cold warnings over here around the Kootenay Park region. Arctic outflow warnings up on the north coast inland and for the Whistler area. Up in Pemberton, too. Pretty much no cloud today, pretty much across the south coast, across much of southern BC. That's the same story. Some more cloud moves in tomorrow. That will continue throughout the day at times, sometimes cloudier than others. On Friday, we see some clearing up at times, And yeah, that's really all we got, Dan.
Okay. Thanks, Darius.
Thank you.
Still to come, a cautionary tale for backcountry lovers after a frightening avalanche near miss in BC's interior caught on video. We'll show you more after this. So far, so good this winter in BC's backcountry. As of now, there have been no deadly avalanches in the province this season, but there has been at least one very close call. The CBC's Tom Popick has more on a slide caught on video and the warnings from experts.
Digging out their sleds near Sycamoose earlier this month,
oh shit, guys.
Wally Taylor and his friends spot a wall of snow crashing down.
Luckily, just got the sleds. We got out of there in time, but just the force, the impact when it hit the snow or hit the snowmobiles was really strong.
No one buried, but one sled thrown 30 feet rolling down the hill. For Avalanche Canada's Ian Snowsell,
I mean, it's definitely good news, something we're pretty happy about here to hear.
In fact, so far this season, not a single avalanche fatality. Snowcell can't point to a specific reason. Last winter, 12 people died in Canadian slides. 15 were killed the year before.
Over like a 10-year period, the average of fatalities has been coming down. So hopefully part of the factor is people are becoming more aware and more educated. I do think we've had a relatively stable snowpack this winter through most of our regions.
This latest cold snap creating frozen snow layers that could lead to increased avalanche risk, all depending on the snowfall and weather to come. For Wally Taylor,
I realized how bad it was and how much we could have gotten hurt.
His video of the slide has now gone viral with more than 1 million social media views.
We just wanted to put it out there to give everybody a reminder and keep it fresh in their head that it's high avalanche risk.
A reminder winter and the danger isn't over yet. Tom Popick, CBC News, Kelowna.
A North Vancouver man and his furry companion took that city's mayor on a blind-led walk recently. David Brunn hopes that highlighting the difficulties will prompt action to improve walkability for those visually impaired.
Nadia, find the stairs. Good girl. Nadia, forward. Yeah, so really accessibility walks are about allowing elected officials to follow along as we get an idea of, one is what we do to get around. How do I use a guide dog? How a person uses a white cane. So really the walks are just to sort of identify that and then to have a discussion about what the urban design is like and what things could possibly be done to make it more accessible to a wider group of people. Mm-hmm. Guide dogs are trained to work from A to B, and they pick the safest and most obstacle-free route. The expectation is to press the signal to tell me it's safe to cross the street. I have to cross the bike lane first to get to that.
Right.
Which doesn't make any sense.
So it would have been better for it to be on that side.
And this is where we'll continue on to the next part.
Okay.
And because my whole belief is that none of this should be here. When we get here, this is set up, but mid-block crossings are super difficult for people with vision loss. The reason behind that is you don't have the cross traffic. So my guarantee that I'm not going to get run down is with the traffic going perpendicular to me,
right.
It stops the traffic that would otherwise be coming across my path.
Right.
There's a lot of inconsistency. So even where you have a group sort of talking about accessibility, without there being firm standards of saying, okay, so for a pedestrian ramp, this is what it should look like. Mm-hmm. These are the different degrees of elevation. This is the type of tactile surface to use, where it's very stated to what it is.
The more that we learn as policymakers what the lived experience is, makes it easier for us and better for us to make better decisions that's going to support everyone. So this has been really, really valuable, David, and I really appreciate your time in doing this.
Well, Mayor, really appreciate you coming you coming out.
There's a look at Toronto, where a snowstorm is hitting the Big Smoke with about 15 centimeters expected. Ottawa and Montreal, meanwhile, will likely get a heck of a lot more than that. Darius has your BC-wide weather forecast and more after this. Back to our top story now. All of Canada's premiers have gathered in Washington, D.C. As Katie Simpson reports, it's the latest Canadian foray against the U.S. president's tariff threats.
It all came together at the last minute. Canada's premiers invited into the White House to make their anti-tariff pitch.
The message is we're here to listen and see what the Trump administration expects off of Canada.
We're hoping to learn what we can do together to make sure that our economies are strong and that we don't have the kind of inflation-causing tariffs put on the Canadian or the American people.
After an hour-long security screening, the premiers headed in to meet two White House officials, James Blair, a deputy chief of staff, and Sergio Gore, a senior White House hiring advisor.
It was a very positive conversation, so we'll see how we move forward.
There were some very frank moments across the table, and they urged us to take the president at his word.
That seems to mean Donald Trump's border security complaints need to be taken seriously, the premiers say. While they outlined the pain tariffs would inflict on both the Canadian and American economies, and also pushed back against Trump's threats to annex Canada.
Yeah, we had frank conversations where about the 51st state comment, where we underlined that was a non-starter.
That seemed to irk one of the U.S. officials in the meeting, James Blair, posting on social media. To be clear, we never agreed that Canada would not be the 51st state. We only agreed to share Premier Eby's comments. Canadian anger over those 51st state comments and Trump's economic threats. They're resonating, according to Canada's U.S. ambassador.
I think it's well known here in Washington that Canadians were reacting strongly and in a unified way.
She and Canada's finance minister had their own White House meeting with incoming members of Trump's cabinet.
We, I think, have made good progress, and particularly with respect to national security issues, the fight against fentanyl and the border. I'm reassured, but the work isn't done.
Katie Simpson reporting from Washington. The tariffs are not just about politics and diplomacy. They mean real pain for small businesses employing regular people. Sarah Levitt has the story of a sector dependent on aluminum and the cans they filled with craft beer for you.
At this Toronto microbrewery, tariff talk is stressful.
Great Lakes is just one of 1,200 small independent craft breweries operating all throughout Canada, and we're already struggling.
Struggling after COVID impacts, inflation, and now another threat. Potential tariffs on a material essential to their business, aluminum cans.
Well, Sarah, I can't actually swear on camera.
More than half of U.S. aluminum imports come from Canada, primarily Quebec. But the cans themselves are made in the United States. Prices on cans of food, carbonated drinks, and beer could go up.
So it's really going to be hard to absorb without passing anything along to the consumer at the cash register.
Great Lakes Brewery buys its cans for an average of 14 cents each. Now, individually, that might not seem like a lot, but last year they bought 6 million cans, and that cost $840,000. With a 25% tariff, it will cost them more than $1 million.
If this goes on for any length of time, we will be paying significantly more for something that's at the core of what we make and sell.
The worries aren't just north of the border.
It's going to directly affect us, our relationship with our Canadian suppliers.
This Chicago microbrewer says things will be rough for them, too.
You know, we're a small business. We can't just absorb that. It's not really built into our financials, and it's just kind of the way it is for us smaller guys.
Now, these brewers say it's a wait-and-see game. Will the tariffs come into effect, and at what rate? In the meantime, many are getting their cans as fast as they can. Sarah Levitt, CBC News, Montreal.
After years of historic highs, a new report shows Canada's auto theft rate has dropped by 18%. Nicole Williams explains how a police crackdown and more border security may have helped.
So we have in this vehicle, we have this little device.
This Toronto auto shop specializes in installing anti-theft devices, and business is booming.
Our demand definitely increased in the last few years, quite a bit than before.
For years, personal vehicle thefts in Canada have skyrocketed. Losses of some $1.5 billion in 2023 alone.
A lot of customers come over after the insurance is asking them. If not, they're going to increase their price.
But after years of heist hikes, last year thefts went down. New data show a decline of more than 18% nationwide, the largest in Ontario and Quebec.
In 2024 is the first time we've seen a decline in the last 4 years, so it is very promising.
It's in part because of an Ontario Provincial Police task force dedicated to tracking down stolen vehicles, but also because of beefed up security at Canada's borders, notably at the Port of Montreal.
From the Port of Montreal and Ontario-based, they're going to Europe. And then from there, they can go anywhere across Europe.
This inspector says the criminal enterprise is low risk and high reward. Canadian vehicles often worth more in other countries.
It's a very high profit crime that they then use to fuel other crimes, drugs, importation, exportation, firearms trafficking, and in some cases terrorism.
While the law enforcement strategy has made a difference, it's also expensive and auto thefts remain high.
We still have to get to the prevention phase, making the vehicle harder to steal in the first place, really to have sustained decline in auto theft.
Transport Canada is expected to announce new rules for automakers sometime this year to modernize safety devices designed to stop thieves from being able to drive off. Nicole Williams, CBC News, Toronto.
U.S. relations with Russia seem to be on the upswing. After a call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, Donald Trump says negotiations to end the war in Ukraine will begin immediately. As Chris Brown explains, the apparent message to Kyiv is it's time to make concessions.
Getting peace, I think President Putin wants peace.
Donald Trump says he spoke to Russia's leader for a remarkably long 90 minutes.
We'll meet in Saudi Arabia, see if we can get something done.
But Trump appeared to indicate Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky won't be at that meeting. And when asked if Ukraine is an equal partner, Trump also appeared to suggest maybe not.
It's an interesting question. I think they have to make peace. I said that was not a good war to go into.
It was, of course, Russia that invaded Ukraine almost 3 years ago. The announcement capped a day of dizzying developments that began with Pete Hegseth, the new defense secretary, spelling out how the U.S. will support Ukraine going forward.
We must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective.
That's a big shift, as Washington has always publicly backed Ukraine's demand for a full Russian withdrawal from the roughly 20% of Ukrainian territory Putin's troops now control.
The United States does not believe that NATO membership for Ukraine is a realistic outcome of a negotiated settlement.
Hegseth also said no American soldiers will be stationed in a post-war Ukraine as peacekeepers, only European ones.
The war is a top priority.
At the same time, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent visited Kyiv to push Zelensky to provide the U.S. with rare earth minerals as part of a new security partnership between the Trump administration and Ukraine.
I know that he's a strong man, and I'm sure that he will push Putin.
Vladimir Zelensky characterized his own phone call with Donald Trump as meaningful. But just because Vladimir Putin says he wants negotiations, it doesn't mean he actually wants to negotiate. The Kremlin's demands so far have amounted to Ukraine's capitulation. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
UBC has produced many high-flying scientists over the years, but it doesn't get higher than the International Space Station. Jessica Meir is a NASA astronaut and former UBC researcher. Now she's giving back. Our Darius Madavi has the story of her flock and her flight.
These feathers belonged to a bar-headed goose, one of the highest flying species of birds, famous for migrating over the Himalayas. But these feathers in particular went literally above and beyond, up to the International Space Station. And we spoke with the mother goose astronaut who took them there.
Well, I wanted to be an astronaut from the time that I was 5 years old.
Jessica Meir spent the first part of her career researching how animals survive in low-oxygen environments, which now, given her time in space, feels almost poetic. From deep-diving emperor penguins in Antarctica and elephant seals in California, to high-flying bar-headed geese right here in Vancouver.
Canada geese can be an interesting species, but these are not Canada geese. These are the bar-headed geese, and they are much sweeter.
These geese are not native to Canada, but the research was done using the wind tunnel at UBC. She wanted to understand how these birds could fly over the highest mountain range on Earth.
That would be a half of the amount of oxygen that we normally have here at sea level.
To pull this off, they needed the geese to wear a special mask to control oxygen levels. For a wild goose, that's not going to fly. So, Mia raised her own flock.
The first thing that they saw was me, and so they literally thought that I was their mother, who was a modern-day mothered goose. And I had 12 goslings that were cuddling with me, following me around everywhere I went.
It wasn't uncommon to see Mia walking around campus with a gaggle of goslings. Then she had to teach them to fly.
I would go up and down the road with a scooter, and they would be flying next to me, sometimes so close that their wings would be brushing the edge of my shoulder.
Once they were ready, Mia got to be a proud mother, watching as her goslings took flight in the wind tunnel.
These were my babies. I was completely in love with them, and it was a very, very special connection.
Not long after, NASA recruited Mia. A good reminder, she says, that astronauts aren't just mechanical engineers anymore.
We have medical doctors now, we have chemists, physicists, biologists, we have other types of engineers. We have really a lot of diverse backgrounds.
When rocketing up to the ISS, astronauts are allowed to pack a few small personal items. Mia brought a symbol from each stage of her life. For her time in Vancouver, a handful of feathers from her geese.
I thought it was also fitting that the feathers from these geese, who thrive at such exceptionally high altitudes, went even further than the summit of Mount Everest and all the way up to the International Space Station to around 250 miles or 400 kilometers up above, so way higher than Everest even.
But the feathers aren't the only thing to make history. In 2019, Mia was part of the first all-woman spacewalk.
Wow, that is amazing.
And during her time on the ISS, she became her own test subject, which may not be a surprise. After all, she spent years studying animals in extreme environments. And is there any environment more extreme than space?
Certainly poked and prodded a lot in the name of science in our role as astronauts up on the space station.
Mia is back on Earth, for now. She recently donated 2 of her space feathers to the Beatty Biodiversity Museum at UBC. In classic astronaut fashion, she thanked the people who were part of her journey.
I hope that when people see these feathers, it gives them a little bit of inspiration. For me, this is a symbol of the whole team that builds everything that we do as individuals and, just really riding the shoulders of giants.
And now anyone can come see the highest flying goose feathers in history. Darius Madavi, CBC News, Vancouver.
Egg prices are skyrocketing south of the border. Here in Canada, though, they're not likely to break the bank anytime soon. Our shoppers are being protected amid an avian flu outbreak. After this break.
Hey, I'm Rohith Joseph. Vibin' is the new show all about discovering great new songs and fresh artists from across BC and beyond. Stream Vibin' on CBC Listen.
There is a live look, if you can see it, from the CBC Toronto headquarters in Toronto, where the city is expected to get blanketed with about 15 centimeters of snow. A snowfall warning is in place, and Environment Canada says roads may get messy as that storm continues. Darius Madava here with our BC-wide weather forecast, but let's start back east and, ooh, Lord, that's a colorful map.
Yes, the light blue is the snow warnings, the dark blue is winter storm warnings. That's snow plus, wind and other fun winter stuff. And then a freezing rain warning along the coast of Lake Erie, or the shore of Lake Erie. Now what's happening here is we've got this cold air that's sweeping in from the north and from the west, and at the same time, we've got, this is a spoiler alert, we've got a low coming up from Texas, and when those two things meet, it means a heck of a lot of snow spreading across the region. And so we're expecting to see as much as, in some places, 50 centimeters of snow coming down along this stretch here in that darkest blue color, and widespread 20 to 40 centimeters. A 30 centimeter amount of snow around Toronto is going to be very disruptive, especially through the day tomorrow. So lots of activity happening there. Let's turn our attention back here to BC, where things have been calm. Some more activity is on the way, though. As we saw there, tomorrow is going to be clouding over, starting probably in the late morning, and then pretty cloudy by the time we hit the evening tomorrow. Friday is a little bit more mixed. We've got some cloudier periods and some less cloudy periods. I'd say parts of the island probably going to have a little bit more sun than we will here on the lower mainland, but we should get some sun here as well. Then as we get into Friday night, overnight into Saturday, we start to see a little bit of precipitation arrive, just a little outbreaks. And as we get into Saturday proper, a more widespread system is going to hit the south coast and really spread across the region, breaking into the interior as well, really spreading our first BC-wide precipitation event in a while. Really, yeah, we're all going to feel it. Let's take a look here as well. You can see some of that snow arriving down here in the southern interior as we get into Friday, and then as we get into the weekend, that's when we really see that bigger system collide with the coast and spread into the rest of BC. In this case, the northeast, which has been getting a little bit of snow lately and may get another flurry tomorrow, is actually probably going to be spared the worst of this one. The rest of BC will get it a bit worse. This shouldn't be too intense, I would say, as of now, but definitely more activity than we've seen in a while, especially here in the south. If we take a look at our temperatures over the next few days, you'll notice that drop up in the north. Here in the southeast, temperatures will start to recover a little bit faster by Friday, whereas in the rest of the southern interior, especially in the Okanagan, it'll probably won't be until early next week that we get a bit warmer and wetter. And here's our conditions across the province tomorrow. Again, a few flurries up in the Peace region. Lots of sunshine everywhere else, but that clouding really happening on the south coast. Here's our 5-day forecast. Dan, some change on the way.
Oh, goodness. Yep, winter.
Something new.
Thanks, Darius.
Thank you.
Well, eggs are in short supply because of avian flu outbreaks in some countries. But as Natalia Weitzel reports, in North America, it's a different story depending on which side of the border the eggs are being sold.
You might have noticed that egg prices in the U.S. have skyrocketed, and some people have even taken to social media to express their frustration. Now, much of this is because of an avian flu outbreak, but here in Canada, egg prices have remained pretty stable. So why is that? And should Canadians be worried about an egg crisis? Well, there's actually a few things we have to take into consideration, like the way Canada manages its avian flu outbreaks in the first place. And this all starts right on the poultry farms with the egg producers themselves.
We need to change our clothes, our boots. When we come in our barn, we need to be very secure to not have contamination from outside to inside. It's the most dangerous problem that we can have in our barn, in our production, and we need to be very careful.
And if an outbreak were to happen, Canada tracks it very closely.
There is aggressive monitoring and reporting and communication and responses towards avian influenza when it affects the poultry farms. We have ongoing data as to which provinces are affected, the number of farms that are affected, the number of poultry that are affected.
Also, our farms are much smaller than those in the U.S. In Canada, the average size of a poultry farm is about 25,000 birds. In the US, the average size of an industrial-grade poultry farm can be anywhere between 6 to 8 million hens.
And as soon as one bird on that farm gets avian influenza, contracts the disease, every single bird on that farm has to be euthanized immediately. And they have euthanized in the US about 150 million birds since 2022.
So outbreaks are just easier to manage. And finally, Canada also has a resilient supply management system that helps stabilize the prices of eggs.
If we do run into any issues in Canada, we can have eggs that are shipped in from other parts of the country in order to satisfy any shortfalls that a province might have.
So does this mean that Canadian egg prices are immune to any fluctuations? Well, if we look at Statistics Canada data, the average retail price for a dozen eggs went up by 11 cents between July to November of 2024. But it turns out that this isn't because of bird flu. It's because of input costs.
Input costs are factored through the entire supply chain. So by input costs, I mean things like fertilizer, electricity, diesel for farm machinery.
And these input costs have gone up tremendously over the last few years. And that increase then gets absorbed into the overall cost of our food. Natalia Vaiksel, CBC News, Montreal.
Doctors across Canada are racing to treat patients showing up with the flu. Numbers are up across large parts of the country, including BC's South Coast. And as Jennifer Yoon explains, while it's late in the season, cases are not showing any signs of slowing down.
Flu season usually winds down this time of year. But behind these walls in a Niagara, Ontario hospital, the number of flu patients doctors are treating is on the rise.
We haven't seen influenza like this since at least the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic.
We're seeing more beds being occupied. We're seeing more ICU beds needed for flu cases.
Across the country, roughly 1 in 5 flu tests are coming back positive. British Columbia and Quebec are also being hit hard. Quebec reported over 4,600 cases last week, including intensive care treatments for some kids.
This is basically influenza doing what influenza does. It just happens to be that we're seeing a lot of cases right now.
Researchers say this year's flu vaccine is moderately effective, reducing the risk of infection by about half. Plus, they're seeing more cases with worrying variants.
Those variants show some mutations that are known to facilitate viral escape from immunity. In other words, may be contributing end of season toward greater mismatch with the vaccine.
There's another downside to this relatively late flu season.
Most people get their flu shots early, September, October, November, and you really only get 3 months of really strong protection from symptomatic infection. So when the peak comes later, like February, most people are past that 3 months of protection.
And because the virus hasn't peaked yet, this message from public health officials for those who haven't yet.
It's not too late to get vaccinated.
Experts say a 50% reduction in the chance of getting sick with the flu is better than none at all, especially for those most vulnerable to severe illness, older folks, the very young, and pregnant women. Jennifer Yoon, CBC News, Toronto.
There is lots of excitement with the Invictus Games being held in Vancouver and Whistler this year. And for the first time, the games feature winter sports. More on that next.
The 2025 Invictus Games for injured military and service personnel kicked off in Vancouver earlier this week, and they continue in Whistler for the winter competitions.
This is the first time the Games feature winter sports. The CBC's Jessica Chung was in Whistler to speak with athletes and spectators.
Crowds of people gathered at the base of Whistler Mountain cheering on Canadian athletes competing in this year's Invictus Games. The alpine ski and snowboard event is capping off the 3-day winter sports portion of the Games that also featured Nordic skiing, biathlon, and skeleton events. Now, Team Canada was represented in all of those events, including a few names from BC, like Teresa Whitemeyer, an Army radio teletype operator who's from Coquitlam, BC. I spoke to her after her alpine ski run, and she says this experience has been healing.
For me, it's not so much about the competition. This was awesome, but I'm 20 years ago was the last time I skied. So getting this sport back, learning to have that beautiful conversation with the mountain again is just absolutely heart healing.
And that's a common theme expressed amongst participants, including multi-event competitor Danielle Beal from Colwood, BC, who served in the military as a physician assistant.
They bring together, I wouldn't say we're broken, but we're bent people. And they bring us together we re-experience the life that we had. I used to get angry and I would just steer away from people. Now, when I get angry, I go to my clan, my gang, right? And it doesn't matter what country they are, they're all wearing a flag. It's all good.
Now, this year's Invictus Games is the first to introduce winter sport events, which were held in Whistler.
We've had so many instances where people have come to this event who really might not have seen or appreciated the service members and what they've done for all of us, and they leave changed and leave with a new respect.
It's cool to know the history of this, which I just learned yesterday, and how the Invictus Games sort of came to be.
I've enjoyed seeing all the athletes from all the different countries. I've enjoyed the DJs in the plaza, walking through the village. And it's just, it's pretty exciting to have this here.
Just what the world needs is a little bit of celebration of all abilities.
After the winter sports wraps up, competitors will be heading to Vancouver for the rest of the events, including rowing, swimming, and sitting volleyball. Jessica Chung, CBC News, Whistler.
That is so cool. And they are competing in truly winter conditions, man.
Yes, much more wintry than we normally get.
Yeah.
Here, minus 15, it feels like in Whistler right now.
Wow. And that's probably not really high up, or is that?
That's probably the village, yeah.
Ooh,
so
well, there you
you're on
go.
the mountain.
There
Nice.
you go.
Thanks for being with us tonight on CBC Vancouver News at 6. You can watch this newscast on CBC Gem, YouTube, and our website.
We will have, both of us, your next local news at 11 o'clock, right after the Nationals. So please join us then. Good night.